Okay, come here, I got something to show you. Looks like we got us a project. Looking at my 1966 Chevy Caprice. This car comes with a 327, and one thing that it does not have is air conditioning. I'm going to bring you in so you can see what we're dealing with here. You can see here that the heater core isn't even hooked up. This is kind of the way it was when I bought it. And so I picked up a kit from Classic Auto Air to put in this, and that's what this video and I imagine a series of others will be about. I'm going to do a step-by-step process, getting it in, and show you some of the key things that you have to deal with when you're putting this thing in the car. One thing that I want to point out is that during this project, I'm going to be showing you basically the highlights of how to do things. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail in the video showing me struggling over how to take anything out. I'm just going to be going through each of the steps, and if there's something in particular that you need to see that I think is necessary, I'll go ahead and show it. There are other videos out there that show this same process in excruciating detail, and you can certainly take a look at those if you want to see somebody struggling with bolts and removing certain objects. But for the sake of this video, in order to keep it kind of short, we're going to just show you the highlights. So for example, the very first thing that they want you to do is remove the battery, and we can do that like so. Easy peasy. So the next thing that we want to do is remove the battery box and drain the radiator. So that's up next. So there's 4 bolts that are holding this in. There's 2 on the sides here that go into the radiator strut, and 2 from the bottom that you've got to get. One that's right here, and the 4th one is attached to that little support right there. And it's a little hard to find, but you eventually locate it by pulling on the thing and wonder why it's not coming out. Anyway, that's the 4th one. I gotta stress also, make sure you use a lot of PB Blaster or some other kind of lubricant that will loosen up these rusty bolts, because if you try to take them off on your own, you're gonna see some of them break, and you definitely don't want that. So here's what we've got. Fan is out, the fan shroud is out, radiator has been drained, and I've removed both of the hoses, and all the belts are gone. So now we can look at the pulleys themselves. I took the top pulley off, that was that single pulley, and you see the bottom pulley down there, that will take care of 2 belts. So this is the configuration that we had before. You had the pulley like so, the inner pulley, and then the outer one, and there was a space. What we do is we substitute that for this new pulley. That will give us a total of 3 belt areas, and everything should work just fine. And we'll install that next. Okay, so we've got the 2 pulleys replaced, top and bottom, so now we can accommodate that 3rd belt that will go over to the compressor once that's mounted over on this side. So the next step is for us to loosen and disconnect that inner fender. We need to do that so that we can get to all the screws that hold on the blower housing. There's a couple of them that you can't get to unless you take the fender out. So that's next. Okay, so the next step here is to get that inner fender taken out of there. We're going to start with the trim ring, and then we'll move on to the bolts for the fender itself. On my initial inspection, the bolts don't look too bad, but you never know with these things, so it's going to require a lot of lubricant in order to make sure that they don't break off when I'm trying to take them off of the car. So we'll see how we do. Start with the trim ring, we'll get that off, and then we'll move on to the inner fender itself. These two right here and here, I ended up having to take a grinder to. I thought that I was loosening them, but what was happening, you can see this guy right here. Here's where I zinged him off with the cutoff. This whole unit here, I think, is what was spinning. And so I wasn't making any headway. In some ways, I kind of wished they had broken off. It would have been a little easier. So in this case, I just took the grinder, I cut the heads off, and then popped them through the other side. I'll have to replace those with some new bolts. I'm going to be moving on to the remainder of the fender. And let me get you in here so that you can see. I want you to see the way it looks over here. Now, you got the same situation on these, but I can get to these. So I could, put like a vice grip or something like that on there to hold them in place. Same thing with the ones down here. You've got them down there, over there. So I think I'm going to have a little better time with those. There's also 4. Let me bring you in over here. Way in the back there. I don't know if you can see them, but they have to come out too. Well, we've got all of the 14 bolts out of the inner fender, and I got to tell you, that one was a real bear, because out of the 14 bolts, I think there were at least 6 that I remember they had to be ground off with the grinder, and the rest of them came up fairly easily, but it was hard to do. So just keep that in the back of your mind. If you're going to do this job, if you haven't had that fender off before, you might be in for a little tough time. Anyway, the next step that we have now is to remove the blower assembly. There's a cover that has 7 screws, and then there's 2 screws for the blower motor. The 2 screws for the blower motor are accessed through this area here, which is why we had to take the inner fender off. But that's what's next. We're going to work on that and see where we go from there. Well, we finally got it out. The real problem here were these 2 screws that they were saying you had to remove the wheel well in order to get to. This top one was just a bear to get to, and it took me a couple of hours of kind of moving things around in order to be able to even get to it, let alone take it off. But we've got it off, and now we're supposed to replace it with this guy, which we're going to do next. We're supposed to use the existing hardware, pop it back in. There's a ton of room in there now that the blower motor is gone, so that should be fairly easy. Okay, so I got that plate in. That was a little harder than what I expected, mainly because that lower bolt did not line up with the existing hole, so I just had to drill another hole in order to get the thing in, and it was a few extra minutes, but that was done. And now you can see that the inner fender is pretty much back in place. However, it's not completely done, because if you recall, I had to zing off a lot of those bolts that were holding it in place with a grinder. So I've ordered up a new inner fender bolt kit, and that should be coming in the next couple of days, and once that's here, I'll be able to get that secured. But for right now, I've got it in place with those 4 inner bolts there, and then I've got these 2 top ones, and that should be fine for the time being. So we're going to be moving on to the next section, which is basically to remove that heater box, and you got to do that from the inside. So the heater box is located underneath, or behind the glove box, that's one of the very first things they have you do is remove the glove box. Now in my case I had already done that because I put a custom radio in this prior to doing this work, so I decided just to leave the glove box out since I knew I was going to do the air conditioning. The heater box is held in by the studs that poke through the firewall, so one of the first things you have to do is disconnect the what they refer to as the relay, which is right there. You can just barely make it out. And then you have to take these cables off, and these are the things that operate the heater control and the fan and all that good stuff. So that's going to be next. It takes a 5/16 nut driver in order to get those little nuts out of there, so I'll be doing that next, and I imagine this is probably going to be just as much of a struggle as any of the last portions were. So this is next, and we'll be checking in once that's done. Well, this came out fairly easily. There's one thing that you really need to know about. That's right here. I'll try to zoom in a little so you can see it. You get a light on that too. You can see where that third cable is connected, and you can't get to that until this heater assembly is out of the car. You can see it's right there. So once this is out far enough, you can get to that and take it off. Okay, these are out of the car now, and the next step that the directions say is you have to drill a 3/4 inch hole into the firewall, just like I did there. That is for the drain tube for the AC unit, and for that I used this 3/4 inch drill bit. I've got a separate video on this. If you're interested in how to get a hold of it, you can get them on Amazon. They're pretty cheap and they work really well. Removing the control head's pretty straightforward. It's 2 Phillips screws underneath the dash over here. You see, I had to take my knee knocker out in order to get to it, but that was no big deal. Also, you've got the plug right here that you got to disconnect, as well as your lights. It's got 2 lights that illuminate this. Good time to change the bulbs if you're thinking about it. So I cleaned up the control head a little. It had a fair amount of gack all over it. So the next thing that you have to do is disconnect this electrical connector here. So now I have this new controller in place. Basically what they do is they provide you with this little template. You cut the areas out where you're supposed to, and then you line it up like so, and then it shows you where to drill the holes to put this new one in. This one does not require a long cable. It's just got a little shorty here, and it's operates the speed control. And then the other two, you use these cables that are provided. This super long one, I'm pretty sure, is going to go through the firewall and connect up to a apparatus that's on one of the heater hoses. And that should regulate the amount of fluid that's going to go into the heater core. That's how you're going to regulate your temperature. This other one over here is basically going to control whether you're directing the heat or cold to the floor, the defrost, or out the vents. That wasn't that big of a deal to do, and that's going to pretty much wrap it up for this first section, and we will continue this on the next video.